If you don't know me, my name is Fred Matthies. I've been a master naturalist, master gardener, and master food volunteer for a few years. I always say I'm those things in name only, so don't expect too much as far as my knowledge of plants because I'm a little weak on that. But I've got a lot of video or pictures in here to show you. But what I mainly wanted to talk about were these 4 nature trails that we have in New Kent County. And the first one will be Quinton Community Park, which I'm sure some of you have been to. The next one is Crawford State Park, Vandale Preserve at Cumberland, and also the Woronoy Nature Trail. I'll probably spend a little more time on the Woronoy Nature Trail because that's my favorite one. No offense to the others. Okay, now, if you've ever heard of this book, it's really great. It's good to get. It talks about roughly 60 hikes within 60 miles of Richmond. And there are several books like this, and it's on 50 different cities. So if you're going to go to a new city, Chicago or whatever, and you want to do some hiking, you can always go ahead and either Google some trails or you can get the local book that they've got on that. Like I say, they've got about 50 different books that talk about these hikes. And they're very detailed. Like this I've got here, it's over 300 pages. And they're broken down very nicely too. They've got the hikes listed by mileage, by early sites, colonial or early sites, by Civil War sites, some featuring historic homes, museums, nature centers, major rivers. So it's broken down really nicely. And like I say, we've got 60 hikes in this book. So if you've never run across that, Barnes & Noble, or you can order it from Amazon. And it's pretty cheap on Amazon. So the first one I want to talk about is Community Park, Quinton Community Park. And I think most of you probably know where this is. If you're coming from, Richmond or Williamsburg, you'd want to take 205 and come straight up 249. But I'll try to gear this to the locals because I think we're all locals now. It's right off Henpeck Road, and it's a beautiful little trail, and it's a park. It's run by the foresters just down the road a ways, a little west of Providence Forge. It's a large parking lot, and excuse me, not the foresters, but we've got about a half-mile paved walking trail. And there's lots of other things here at the community park. They've got a basketball, pickleball courts. They've got a covered shelter with several tables and a playground, 2 athletic fields, and a horseshoe pit. But I think you'll have to bring your own horseshoes. And this is, I've got a couple of pictures of that to show you what it looks like. But here's the playground and the tennis court. Now the tennis court, last time I looked, it was not open because of COVID-19. For what the director of Parks and Recs has told me, she said that they put in a pickleball court in the middle of the basketball court. So if any of you like to play pickleball, you can do that as soon as it opens. And on the right, here's a shelter, and it's got a Coke machine, and I think probably at least 6 tables. So there's plenty of room there if you want to, space out, keep your 6 feet apart. My wife, Chris, has had a book club meeting there once, and it was pretty good. Everyone was able to spread out. Crawford State Forest. Now, those of you who live on 60 have probably seen this before, but it's about a little less than 2 miles west of Providence Forge, and it's on Route 60. It's a pretty big area. They've got almost 260 acres. The trail is 1 1/3 miles, but now if you go this time, it's going to be kind of wet. So with all the rain we've had, and it's kind of one of the lower lying areas, it's going to be damp most of the time. And there's a little parking lot there that you can park in. I don't think it'll take many cars, but it's mainly a birding and wildlife sanctuary. You can even bring your dog or horse if you've got a horse, but they don't allow any hunting there or camping. And of course, no vehicles on the trail. But it's a nice little forest. It's run by the state foresters, and which you can see just down the roadways to the west. And that's kind of the way the map looks, but it's not a very good photo. But I think if you're on 60, if you're on 60, and let's say you're coming from Williamsburg, it'll be hard to see because they've got the divided highway there, and you'll have to go down a little ways and turn around. But it's like all of these things, you can just go ahead and do an internet search and get the GPS location and find it pretty easily. So here's the map. That's what it looks like from my site that I Googled. And you'll see a lot of greenery. The forests there are beautiful. We've got lots of trees, ferns, hardwood trees, conifers, you name it. But like I say, it's usually a little wet. So you've got to be careful when you go there. And also, you might want to take something like some hiking sticks or a hiking stick. Lots of hidden hazards there with all the leaves. So, Vandel, this is an interesting preserve. It's about 1 mile east of New Kent on 249. And you want to look for Cumberland Road. That's probably the easiest way to get there is off of 205, exit 205, or you can come in on 220 or 214. But on this website, once you Google that and get to the website, you'll be able to get the actual location and put it in your GPS and get there with no problems. But it's really an impressive park. And I've also got it highlighted here in the book, and I might go ahead and bring up a couple of things about that as we go on. But once you go there you make a left on that Cumberland Road or a right, depending on where you're coming from. And you'll see a New Elam church on the right, but this is really a cool place. It's called the Cumberland Estate House Plantation. I don't know if you all are familiar with John Poindexter, but you've probably seen Poindexter Road in New Kent, and it's named after the Poindexter family. Well, the history of this thing dates back to the 1600s, and I think John Poindexter, a relative, just was able to buy this, a few years ago back. So it's kind of an interesting place to visit, and it's on the way to the Vandel. And here's another view of that, the house. What's interesting in the house is that you've got about 4 or 5 different other houses there that you can actually go ahead and rent. So if you wanted to go stay there for a few nights or whatever, or have a family get together, some of the houses are big enough to take a whole family. And then once a year, they usually open this during some special time, and you can actually visit the estate. I was able to go on it once here a couple of years ago, and it's pretty neat. Here's another view coming up to the main house, one of the weddings that they probably had. And they've got a few pretty gardens here. Now here's a nice English style garden that you'll see if you're ever able to go out there. I don't know what the rentals are on these lodges that you can stay in, but you can go on Cumberland's site and you can even call and ask them questions on that. So there's also a children's hospital down at the end of the road, and it overlooks the Pamunkey River. You can see that in the back over here. And you might even have seen this in the news here lately, which I probably won't go into. But it's a children's hospital, and that for children and adolescents and serious brain injuries, illnesses, or any sort of behavior problems. And what's nice about the Vandel Nature Trail, Cumberland Nature Trail, is that a lot of the kids here can go on that and get a good hike in. So they use it to help the kids too. So Vandel Preserve at Cumberland Marsh. It's mainly a big tidal marsh, and it's a woodland upland trail. The trail is a good distance. It's 4.2 miles. It's you'll see lots of birds and deciduous trees, coniferous trees, but it's a great trail, and it's all flat, which a lot of people like. It's also situated along the Atlantic flyway, so you'll be able to see lots of the migrating birds and stuff when they migrate. So especially, last month, it was really good. There's lots of parking too. I was just out there today because in the book, it said that this is closed in November. So anyway, I went out there and it looked like it was open. So anyway, it's a good hike. And that 4.2 miles will probably seem like about 10 after you get through it. So you can have about probably 10 or 12 cars availability there to park. So they've got some other nice features. They've got a ramp that leads down to Holtz Creek. Holtz Creek actually feeds into the Pamunkey River. And this is a good viewpoint here to see some of the birds and the migrating waterfowl. And it's ADA accessible. That's about the only spot that is, because the rest of the trail is not. It's a tough trail. But again, it's all flat. So what's this known for? Well, there's the largest population of the rare sensitive joint vetch. Now, I had no idea what this was, but it's a member of the pea family. And I've been out there several times. My wife and I, we even took the hiking club out here a few times, but I've never seen the joint vetch. So if you ever see something like this in the spring, that's what you'll know that's what it is. And it's also one of the endangered species, but it's the world's largest population. And you can even do an internet search on this and get some more pictures. So the trail itself, it's like I say, it's a flat hike. It takes Chris and I about an hour and a half to do that. We walk pretty fast. So the advertised distance in the book says 2.5 hours. Well, I guess that's if you do a lot of, stopping and bird watching along the way. But it's well marked, and you can see these markers here. And you really can't get lost, but what it is, it's a big loop. I don't know if you can see this map here very well. I'm not sure if these, if our video is in the way, but it's really easy to follow because you can't get lost. But what it is, it's a big loop. And if you go around the loop and you start at the left and go around, just try to, if the sun is out, you can tell where you are basically if the sun is out, just wherever you feel it on your back or your necks or whatever. But if you go all around from the left and you go to the water's edge, you've gone too far, so you might have to backtrack a bit. But like I say, it's pretty well marked. But sometimes if you're looking at the ground, and I would encourage you to look at the ground when you're on this trail because there's lots of trip hazards. And this trail is owned by the Nature Conservancy, and they've had it for about 20 years now. I might add too that this is the only trail that I've ever seen a copperhead snake on. So you might see a lot of snakes too, mainly black snakes. So the Warreneye Nature Trail is my favorite trail. And I came to New Kent about 5 years ago. I'm retired Navy, and I taught school for 7 years and became an administrator, but I came to my senses and then took a job as a federal ranger with the Corps of Engineers. So I did that for about 10 years. And that's kind of when I got interested in the Master Naturalist and Master Gardener programs. But we moved to New Kent about 5 years ago. And Warreneye Nature Trail is maintained by the New Kent Parks and Recs. So what I am for them is not only a master naturalist, but I'm the trail ambassador. So if I see people out on the trail, I'll introduce myself to them and, ask them if they know where they are, because I can always tell when there's someone new on the trail because we've got 4 different big bulletin boards there. And if I see someone looking at that bulletin board pretty intensely, I'm thinking, well, maybe I'd better talk to them and tell them who I am. So I don't want to say it's easy to get lost on the trail, but sometimes people do. And this project for the Master Naturalist was approved about 3 years ago. So I put in a plan, and it was approved. So I count half my hours for the Master Naturalist and my hours for the Coast Guard Auxiliary. Okay. So here's a map. Now what I've done is I've got 4 different map stations here, and I put these nice colored maps on each in each map box. So wherever you go to a bulletin board, you'll see a map box, and you'll be able to pull out a map. And on the back, we've got some nice things written about the history of the trail and a few things you want to look at. So what I'll try to talk about for the next few minutes basically is the history of the trail, where we've been, where we're now, and what we need to do later, where we're going. But I think if you take this map and look at it, I always say it's clear as mud because you really have to orient this map to the trail. So you can see up here, here's the parking lot, and there's the first bulletin board there. So what I recommend to people is when they get to that first bulletin board is to take the map and turn it upside down. And that way you can go ahead and orient the map to the trail. And it's a good map. Of course, it's got a few problems, which I'll go over here in a minute. Now, can you all see anything I've got to the right of 18th century? Or is Jan's picture in the way? The video. Can you see anything that I have? Can you see the rest of the word history at the top, Jan?
Yeah, I can see it.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. I thought I might have been cut off. So anyway, the trail has a lot of interesting sites on it. It's usually about a half-hour walk, go left, go left, go left, all the way up to the old Warrenai church site. And you'll see a couple of grave sites dating back to, the 18th century. Well, one is Captain John Long, who was just a 25-year-old youngster, but he was captain of the old ship John and Mary. Now, I've tried to get some more research done on this guy, but I cannot find anything on him or the John and Mary. So that's all we've got. It's when you get up to the top where these 2 graves are, we've got another little bulletin board that says a little of the history about this. The other grave is of a Dr. Thomas Arnott, and he made it a little older. I think he was about 37 or 38, so he didn't live too long back in those days. But anyway, they're nicely preserved grave sites, and you might want that to be one of your first trips, is to keep going left on the trail, and you get up there and you'll come to a big loop before you get to the trail, and you can just loop on around. It'll bring you around and back. So it's pretty well shown on the map. Now I do want to talk about the old stage road. Now, if you do walk to the grave sites and you go up to the grave sites and go back down the other side, you'll see an old washout area. Well, that washout area is really not a washout area. It's the old stage road that went to Williamsburg. But it does look like a big wash. So the people used to come from the west and come to this church, the old Pamunkey or Warrenai Church. They'd follow this road along the Pamunkey River, and the church was at the top, very close to where these 2 graves are. Now, the only thing that you see remaining of the church now, you might be able to find a couple of bricks. That's about it, though. I don't know what they did with the bricks, but someone got all the bricks. We also have a slave cemetery, which is about 100 yards, I think it's north of where the church would have been. And you can walk down and see what's left. They have a kind of a pyramidal marker down there. It looks like it's green from the trail. Hard to see, especially when the leaves are on the trees, but I think you can find it if you look at the little bulletin board and it tells you where it roughly is. So these 2 ladies are Master Naturalists. They're from the Southside chapter. So they've accompanied me on a couple of these hikes, and we've done some wildlife mapping with them. But as far as the history, the history goes back to the 1600s when they had the old stage road that went to the east. But in around 1970, early 70s, that whole area was owned by the Chesapeake Forest Products Company. We used to call it the Chesapeake Corporation, but Chesapeake Corporation used to have a lot of the hunting lands in Virginia, and they would provide a lot of the wood to the local sawmills. So anyway, I don't think they're in business anymore, but we try to give them credit on the map and whenever we do one of these presentations, because they did the original trail back in 1970-ish. So then and now, I think it's still about, close to 600 acres. And way back when the Chesapeake Corporation had it, they grew a lot of trees, mainly hardwood and pines. Now that tree there, I wish that would really show it justice, because that tree is much bigger than it looks. That's actually a yellow poplar tree. And believe it or not, that thing is 6 feet in diameter. And it really leans much more than that picture shows, but I'll get into this a little later when I talk about the Big Tree Program, Virginia's Big Tree Program. So the Chesapeake Corporation put in the original trail here, and they had a trail guide that they used to give folks. I don't know where they kept those trail guides, because we've only been able to find one. So what the trail guide did, it talked about all of these markers along the trail, and this is what some of the markers look like. Now, I didn't dig those things up. So the bike club digs the markers up, and usually they'll leave them close by so that I can replant them, but they are a real hazard to the bike club. I mean, those, you can barely see the number here, but those are all sharp edges. So if you're going on a mountain bike and you hit one of those things, it can do a lot of damage. But the bike club does a lot of the heavy lifting for us at the park. They do put in all the bridges. We have a lot of bridges there. It keeps the people out of the water. So we've only got about 30 of these left. And my goal has been to try to get the rest of these replanted and to put out a new trail guide. But what these have marked, a lot of the trees, a lot of the features, and some of the things that they've marked before, many of the species are still not there. It's like any forest, the trees don't live forever. But I want to see if I can show you. Marl Loop is my favorite. Now, it's kind of hard to find, but I'll show you a little better photo of that later here. So who's involved? Well, we've got several key players who keep the Woronoy Nature Trail up to speed. Parks and Recs since 2001, they acquired that. The Eastern Virginia, it's Eastern. See, I didn't think I made any mistakes in this, but you never know. So the Eastern Virginia Mountain Bike Association have been heavily involved in this. And like I say, they really do all the heavy lifting. And also the Historic Rivers Master Naturalists. We've had a few of the Master Naturalists come out here and take a hike with me. We've had some of the native plant people come out here and give us a brief on what type of plants are out here. There's lots to see, lots to see. Okay, now we do have some of these plaques that we have up that identifies some of the trees that we have, and they need a little work, and they're made by Voss Science. It was been my goal to go ahead and get some new plaques, but funding is difficult, and if we can't get the funding, it might be me. So our goal is to get some newer plaques, improve the trail map, because the trail map isn't always up to date. The bike club is usually cutting in lots of new loops, because they like the mountain bikes and they like the hills, and you like to go around things and stuff. So they'll do a lot of different loops. But if you kind of keep one of these maps with you, you'll be able to understand where you are. What New Ken has done, they have what they call a Woronoy Trail app, an application. Well, it's really kind of a site that you can go to. And with the easiest way I'd recommend that to you to get there is just to Google the New Kent Parks and Recs Woronoy Trail app. And that way you'll come to that site And at the bottom of that page, you'll be a Know Where You Are app, and that's the trail application. What's nice about that is if you bring that up when you're in the park, it shows you exactly where you are and it's a moving dot. Might take you a little bit of time to figure out how to use that application, but mainly once you bring the app up where you are, you can click on a little round button to the left and it'll be a moving dot. So if you just keep the phone pointed in the direction the moving dot is going, you'll be able to know exactly where you are. So we also have a lot of these yellow carcinite markers, and the bike club put all those in. And I think it's hard to get lost. Now, if I talk to people or if you go on the websites where people recommend this trail, they'll say it's easy to get lost. You need to bring some breadcrumbs with you. But, you know, after being on this trail about 300 or 400 times, I take a different trail each time. So I know all the trails, but it can really get confusing. So what we do here is, you know, we do nature hikes. Sometimes New Kent Parks and Recs will let me be in their guide and people can sign up to go on a hike with me. We've had future farmers out here, 4-H people. We've had Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, daisies. We've even had some members from the Appalachian Trail Club come out here. And we had one group of about 8 people come out here and I gave them a tour of the park. Then afterwards, we went down to Soddy Creek Winery and had a glass of wine. So that was a nice way to top off the hike. So trail maintenance, I do a lot of trail maintenance. I do, you know, pick up litter and parking lot. I pick up a lot of cigarette butts. So that's not always fun, but someone's got to do it. And I think every cigarette butt that I've seen out there has been a Marlboro. So they're still popular. I also do some lopping. You know, I cut branches that hang down. Occasionally I'll try to pick up some invasive species that I see along the trail, but I try not to get off the trail. During the summer, you know, have to be careful because there's lots of ticks and mosquitoes. So if you stay on the trail, pretty much you will not be getting any ticks. But during the season, when it's warm, you need to spray when you go out there. Because, you know, every time I go out there, I get mosquitoes and buzzing around my head and stuff, but I always spray. We also get some help from the Eagle Scouts occasionally. They put in a lot of birdhouses. So we must have about 30 birdhouses out there, which I clean out once a year in the February timeframe. I think they were originally put in as bluebird boxes, but you know, the forest has changed so much there that it's kind of a canopy, a closed canopy. So bluebirds like to be out in the open a little more. So, you know, who knows what type of birds are going in there, maybe a chickadee or whatever, but there's always something in there. Sometimes a black snake. One time I went up to one of these houses, it was a larger one, and I saw that the front had been all eaten out. So I opened up to clean it out, and out comes a flying squirrel. Scared the heck out of me. Then also 2 babies dropped out. So I picked the babies up and put them back in the birdhouse and shut it up. And I haven't been back there since to check that. I didn't want to find 2 baby skeletons. So anyway, that's still something I probably need to do sometime. So see that little thing in the lower left down here? Anyone know what that is? We have burrowing crayfish out here alongside the creek. So you might see some holes like that. It looks like a hole and there's lots of little round things on the side of it. So they look like they're little piles. And those are burrowing crayfish, and that's a good sign that the water is pure. There are several feeder streams in this park, and they all feed into the Pamunkey. So one thing that I try to do is keep the streams free so that they can flow. So there's always things to do out there, either picking up litter off the trail or sticks off the trail so the bikers don't have an accident, or keeping all the different types of debris out of the stream. So, but I feel as long as the stream's running and the debris isn't too bad, it's good. You can see that here's a few people on the right. Well, that's some members of my old hiking club. I had a hiking club in my neighborhood over here, and we would go to many of the different trails on that 60 hikes within 60 miles of Richmond. So we probably went on about 12 or 13 of those hikes. So this is the group here, probably from a couple of years ago. But again, don't forget when you see the bulletin boards to take a map out of the slot. I try to keep those up to date. And sometimes the maps get wet because people will come through and they won't put the slot back down, so the maps will get wet. Sometimes we get some miscreants who'll go ahead and pick the maps up and throw them around. So you have to worry about that. But the Parks and Recs is pretty good about printing out the maps for me, and then we have four of those bulletin boards, and I try to keep maps in there too. So we also had a doggy station at one time, but guess what? Someone stole it. Well, so anyway, what I'm doing is I'm trying to work on a new trail guide and booklet, slowly but surely, getting some new plaques, that show some of the trees. I'm gonna want to relocate some of the birdhouses, and I've got 5 new ones that I can put in a nice meadow just as you pull into the parking lot. So I think that would be a better spot for the bluebird boxes. And there's always some room out there for some of the master naturalists that want to do some wildlife mapping. But usually when I get groups out here, I really try to hike a little faster because I like a good walk. So if you go on this trail, it's going to take you at least an hour and a half to do the whole 3.5 miles. And once you go on this trail, believe me, you'll know that you've been on a hike because it's got lots of up and down. So some of the things that you may see here, and I'm going to tell you what some of these things are, but I did find an interesting app on my phone. Well, I've got a Google Pixel, and that's a good one to have for identifying plants and mushrooms and whatever. But I've got some of the plant ID applications on my phone, and I think one is iNature and one is, well, I can't remember what the name of the other one is, but you can just go to your app store and download any ID thing like that. But it's really good to have. And I'll tell you, with my Google phone, what I can do is if I take a picture of this and I go to my photos and look at that picture, I can just click on one of these little identifiers and it'll tell me exactly what it is. Like all things, it's not always right. So, but it puts you in the ballpark. So black snakes, there's a black snake on the left, and here's just a couple of pictures of, things you might see. Some of the bridges that the bike club has put in, very nice bridges. They've done a lot of work there. This thing is really kind of cool too. This is up by the bulletin board, just the one that's at the base of the gravesite. Now what that is a tumor. Okay, now a lot of the beech trees have these tumors. So you'll see those, and this one's pretty noticeable because it's about 1 foot in diameter. So it's big. During the spring, you may also see some, let me go back here, some showy orchids or lady slippers. So you'll be able to see lots of, blooming flowers during the spring, and even during the winter, we've got a lot of wildflowers out there that you can see. Now this Luna moth, that was a pretty neat picture. I couldn't believe that when I came across that. The moth was actually on that red spot. Now that red spot is one of the trail markers that used to identify, one of the old maps. So anyway, I thought that was a pretty neat picture, so I took that. Now here's that tumor that I showed you just before. Now it's also got some mushrooms growing on it now. So over the past couple of years, this has really changed. Like I say, these grow on beech trees, but I tried to, with my phone, it said this was a chaga mushroom. I don't know. But anyway, that's about the best I can do. So anyway, when you see that, just remember that it looks a lot different beneath that mushroom. Chaga, maybe a chaga, who knows? Now the big tree program, this is really kind of a neat thing. The Master Naturalists and Virginia Tech heavily involved in the big tree program in Virginia. And this is the oldest tree that I think that I've seen on our trail. And this is the yellow poplar that I showed you an earlier picture of. And I think that, I used to say this was about 218 years old. Now, I don't know how I got those 218 years, because when I do the math on here, what you do, you take the diameter in inches, multiply it by the growth factor, which is 4 for a poplar like this, and the age is about 288 years old. So just imagine this tree somehow started about 288 years ago. Well, let's say between 220 and 288 years. So it's kind of neat when you think about that. But there may even be older ones. In fact, what I heard from the big tree people is that this is not one of the biggest yellow poplars in Virginia. The biggest one is actually like 12 feet in diameter. So, but if you go to the big tree site, Virginia Big Trees, you might be able to visit some of these sites. They've got lots of pictures out there too. Now, I mentioned Marl Loop before. Well, one of the loops I call the Marl Loop. Now you can see this. This is marl. It's actually limestone, calcium carbonate. And when you see these markers, this one is J, I think. Let's see. No, it's B. I had to put my glasses on. So once you get on Marl Loop, you'll see this. Now, you might think that's a little rock, but that rock's about 6 feet tall. So it's pretty noticeable because it's got lots of shells embedded in it and all sorts of other things. But the farmers in the 1920s used to take this limestone and they'd sweeten their fields with it. So they would dig it up. Now, from what I gathered from the old trail guide is this stuff is pretty soft when it's in the ground and it gets harder as it comes out. But any of the limestone like you see along this trail, and there's a whole bank in behind this, it has all sorts of the limestone you can see. There's shells and other debris in there. And it's hard. It's very hard. Okay, so lots more plants. We've got a lot of ferns out there. Christmas ferns, ferns galore. We've got some flowers out here. This thing is kind of neat. It's called running cedar. Looks like little cedar trees, but it's all over the ground out there. Especially noticeable if at the first bulletin board, if you go left, you'll see a whole field of it. Here's one group that I took out with their parents. These are little daisies. So that's me way in the front and the little girls behind. So they, believe it or not, they made it all the way up to the graves. Now, if you go this way, let's say at the first bulletin board, if you go to the right, you go up the original trail. And that'll probably take you about an hour and a half if you go up the outer loop. So if you go to the right at the first bulletin board at the parking lot, this is also part of the old Revolutionary Road Trail, which used to go to Williamsburg. Looks like a big wash, but it's actually the old road. Okay, we've got partridge berry here on the left. You'll see a lot of that out there. Here's one of the delightful bridges that our bike club made. Can't remember what that is. And lots of turtles out there. And the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, which is now the Department of Wildlife Resources, they have a program where they want to know where you see these Virginia box turtles. So if you're ever out here, if you see a box turtle anywhere, just go to the DGIF or DWR site and you can go to the link that's got the box turtle information and you can actually put down the locations. So they're trying to track these, learn a little about their habitat and age and stuff like this. Okay, more sites that you'll see there. Now, what's nice about the Warrenai Trail is, either call it Warrenai, whatever. We've got a nice little playground for the kids, swing sets. There's also a shelter out there. Yeah, I can't really see this. What's this that I've got the marker on? I've got Jan's covering it up.
Oh, K.
Oh, what?
It's K. K for kilo.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyway, I can't see that. So anyway, we've got lots of mushrooms out there, and I'll tell you, I have lots of photographs of mushrooms, and this is one thing that I think is a violet-toothed polypore. So that's what my phone said, and I can't argue with that. And I've got another picture of that too. So here's a longer bridge that the bike club put in, and this is the one that's going to take you up to the graves. So here's another one of the violet-toothed polypore. Lots of unusual mushrooms out there on polypores. So now I always try to, if I get a big mushroom like this or polypore, I always try to put a big foot in with it. Now that's my foot. Now you may think that's a small foot, but really it's probably a size 13. So you can see that that's a big polypore. And I think that's a Berkeley's polypore. And this is a ringneck snake, which I saw on the trail one day. And here is a microporus, which is a good sized, I call them all mushrooms, I'm sorry, but anyway, they're either polypores or mushrooms to me, fungi, fungus. But anyway, it's kind of unusual looking, and I don't think I've ever seen that anywhere else. So yes, hen of the woods. Well, that may be a hen of the woods mushroom batch on the right, but one unusual critter we've had out here has been a rooster. Okay, banny rooster maybe. So this was out here for a couple of months. Every time I would take this hike and I would go to the right at the first bulletin board, I'd see this little critter up there. Well, then he moved down to the shelter. So every once in a while I'd see him at the shelter. So I would bring some bird seed for him and scatter it out, but he wasn't too friendly. But anyway, I always saw him. And it's funny, but I guess in the last month we have not seen this fellow, but so who knows, he might be part of the food chain now. This is one of my favorites. I just took this in October. It's called a lion's mane mushroom. You won't see too many of these. You know, it actually looks like it's a lion mane. They call it bearded toothed or lion's mane. But I'm going to show you a bearded tooth mushroom later on here. I think it might be the next slide or two. So the one on the left I submitted for the photography contests they're having. So we'll see if they like that, but it's pretty uncommon. And you know what? I took these pictures in mid-October and I was trying to wait for them to grow a little bit because I wanted it to be a little bigger. Now the one on the left, it was probably only about 5 inches tall. The one on the right, maybe a little bigger, but I wanted to give it a little time because these things get huge, really huge. So we had a good rainstorm and they were all washed away. So I had to live with the ones that I took earlier. So now this is called a honey fungi. And you can see my foot down there at the lower left. So that was a good sized batch. Now I always like to throw these in. Now these weren't taken from around here, but when I was a ranger in West Point, Georgia, one day I was on one of the back roads and I came across this hawk on top of an old deer skin like this. Well, it's an area that was known for hunting, some of our hunting lands. So what happened was one of the hunters had discarded the hide here and a young juvenile red-tailed hawk found it and he drug it out to the road. So that's him standing on that. Now, just to let you know how close I was in a pickup truck right next to him. So I was probably like 3 feet away. He just looked at me. So this, I think it's what they call a bearded tooth mushroom. And this is gigantic. And this was, believe it or not, about 2 feet tall. And this was also taken in West Point, Georgia. These mushrooms are edible, like a lot of the polypores, but I wouldn't trust anything unless you were really a mushroom expert or had a good mushroom book with you. But I don't think I'd eat any of this stuff because I'm just not too sure. So those are two that aren't of this area. Now these are pretty neat too, these coral-like mushrooms. I took these a while back too. It looks like coral too, especially the one on the right. And this is the actual color of this variety here. And you'll see a lot of mosses and different grasses out there on the trail too. So that's kind of it that I wanted to give you really an update on what's going on at the Woronoy Trail. And it's really, I love being out there. In fact, I go there almost every day and I get a good hike in, try to keep the stream a little clear because probably about 4 or 5 different feeder streams on that. So these are the maps that are in these boxes here. And we've got 4 of these bulletin boards. And it's really hard to get lost out there because we've got a lot of the carcinite poles that will keep you on track. But a lot of the bicycle loops, and that's exactly what they are loops. And if you keep on that loop, it'll take you back to the main trail. Like I say, go to the Parks and Rec's main site and find the location for the Know Where You Are application. And if you bring that up on the trail, you'll have a moving dot. And if you bring that site up in your neighborhood, let's say if you live in a neighborhood like I do, and you put in your location, it'll tell you who all your neighbors are. So I've got about 180 houses here. So if I bring this site up in my neighborhood, it tells me who all the neighbors are. So it's just an added feature. So that's kind of it. Any questions on this, or do you want me to go back to any slides?
Thank you, Fred. I'll stop recording now and we'll
Okay.
have questions.
So that's kind of an unusual mushroom on the